Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for January 9th, 2026. And today we're going to be going over Genesis chapter 19, Genesis chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through the end of the chapter, Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 22, and then finally we are reading through Psalms chapter 7, verses 1 through 9. Now, before I jump into today's episode, there are portions of the reading for today that are quite graphic, so listener discretion is advised. All right, with that said, let's jump into today's recap. Okay, so we are in Genesis chapter 19, and two angels arrive in Sodom in the evening time, and Lot is sitting there at the city gate. Lot being at the city gate means that he has some sort of position of authority there in Sodom, and he immediately invites them to stay at his house. They initially decline, planning to spend the night in the square, but Lot insists, and he prepares a meal for them with fresh bread. Who can refuse fresh bread? Now, before they go to bed, men from all over the city, young and old, surround the house and demand that Lot bring out his guests so that they can sexually abuse them. This is the type of depravity that God was talking about to Abraham in the chapter before. Lot goes outside and offers his two virgin daughters instead, which is horrifying. The men refuse and try to break down the door. The angels pull Lot back inside and strike the mob with blindness. But even the blind men still keep trying to find the door. The angels tell Lot to get his family out. The city is getting destroyed. Lot warns his son-in-law, but they think that he's joking. At dawn, the angels urge Lot to hurry. When he hesitates, they physically grab him, his wife, and daughters and drag them out of the city. God is merciful even when judgment is looming. They're told to run to the mountains and specifically not to look back. Lot negotiates to flee to a small nearby town called Zoar instead. The sun is rising as he arrives, and then fire and burning sulfur rain down on Sodom and Gomorrah. Everything is destroyed. People, plants, everything. Do you remember how the angels specifically said not to look back when these cities were being destroyed? Well, Lot's wife looked back, and she turns into a pillar of salt. She simply could not let go of what was behind her. Abraham looked towards Sodom from a distance and sees smoke rising like a furnace. But God remembered Abraham and brought Lot out to safety. But this certainly doesn't mean that Lot is a good guy, not by a long shot. Actually, at the end of this chapter, we learn of another story about Lot. Lot is currently living in a cave with his two daughters. Remember, these are the two daughters that he offered to the mob of men in place of the angels. And the daughters got Lot drunk for 2 consecutive nights and slept with him to preserve the family line. This is incest, and it's very disturbing. They both get pregnant, and their sons become ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites, who later become enemies of Israel. Even when God rescues people from destruction, sin continues to spread. This whole chapter is, in my opinion, one of the more disgusting chapters in the entire Bible, but this is what happens when the world is filled with sin. Moving on to Genesis chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, Abraham moves to the Negev and settles near Gerar. And he pulls the same move here that he did in Egypt. He tells everybody that Sarah is his sister, because he's afraid that they will kill him and take her for their own. Well, she is his half-sister technically, but she's also his wife. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, takes Sarah, but God comes in a dream and says that he's a dead man because she's married. Abimelech protests that he did not know. He hasn't touched her yet, and he's acted in good conscience. Now, God acknowledges this and says that's why he kept Abimelech from sinning. Now return her to Abraham. He's a prophet and will pray for you. If you don't, you and everyone in your household will die. This is a very strange story, and may I just add that this lady, Sarah, is apparently so beautiful that many kings in Egypt and also Abimelech here wants to take her as their wife. Remember, she is 90. Oh, she's over 90 years old. I mean, this is literally insane that she's so beautiful that people want her for their own when she is that old. What an awesome story. Now, Abimelech confronts Abraham, understandably upset. Abraham explains his fear and the technicality that Sarah is his half sister. Abimelech gives him sheep, cattle, servants, and 1,000 shekels of silver, basically paying him off. He tells Sarah the silver is to cover the offense and to vindicate her. So Abraham prays for Abimelech, and God heals him and his household. God has closed every womb in Abimelech's house because of Sarah. A couple of very strange chapters in a row in Genesis, but let's move over now to Matthew. And we read chapter 7, verses 24 through the end of the chapter. Jesus wraps up his famous Sermon on the Mount with a story. Everyone who hears his words and puts them into practice is like someone who builds their house on rock. Rain comes, streams rise, winds blow, but the house stands because it has a solid foundation. But everyone who hears his words but does not actually do them, it's like building a house on sand. When the storms come, the house collapses with a great crash. Of course, he's saying it's not about hearing the sermon or even agreeing with it. It's about doing what Jesus says. Obedience is the foundation, and we want a foundation off the rock and not off of the sand. Moving on to Matthew chapter 8, and we read verses 1 through 22, Jesus comes down from the mountain, and large crowds follow him. A man with leprosy approaches him and kneels and says that if Jesus is willing, he can heal him. He can make him clean. Jesus reaches out, touches him, and this is significant because he cleans a leper. Now, touching a leper would make you culturally unclean, but Jesus is willing, and the leprosy immediately leaves. Now, Jesus tells him not to tell anyone, but to go and show himself to the priests and offer the required sacrifices. And later in Capernaum, a Roman centurion comes to Jesus. His servant is paralyzed and suffering. Jesus offers to go heal him, but the centurion says that he's not worthy to have Jesus under his roof. He gets it. Just say the word and his servant will be healed. He understands the authority. He is a centurion after all. He's under authority and he has his soldiers under him. He tells them to go and they go. Jesus can do the same with sickness. And Jesus is amazed. He says that he hasn't found anyone in Israel with this kind of faith. Then he makes this statement: many will come from the east and the west and take their places at the feast in the kingdom, but some who should be there will be thrown outside into darkness. The insiders aren't automatically in, the outsiders aren't automatically out. Faith is what matters. Jesus is beginning to talk about the difference between people who are of the line of Israel versus people who are not. In that day and age, being of the line of Israel, being a descendant of Abraham, was what everybody cared about. And Jesus is taking that whole narrative and flipping it on its head. Then Jesus goes to Peter's house. Peter's mother-in-law is sick with a fever. Jesus touches her hand and the fever leaves, and she immediately gets up to serve them. That evening, people bring many who are demon-possessed and sick. Jesus drives out the spirits with a word and heals everyone. Matthew sees this fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy about Jesus in our infirmities and bearing our diseases. Jesus sees the crowd and gives orders to cross to the other side of the lake. A teacher of the law comes up and says that he'll follow Jesus wherever he goes. Jesus responds that foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man, who is Jesus, has no place to lay his head. Following Jesus means embracing a homeless lifestyle. Not very glamorous. Another disciple says that he'll follow but wants to bury his father first. Jesus says to let the dead bury their own dead, but to come and follow him. This sounds harsh, but it's all about priorities. The kingdom takes precedence over even legitimate family obligations. All right, now moving over into Psalms chapter 7, 1 through 9. And David, who wrote the Psalms, is doing what he typically does. He's running away from enemies, and he cries out to God for refuge. He says, "Save me from those pursuing me, or they'll tear me apart like lions with no one to rescue me." He makes a bold claim. If he's done what they are accusing him of, If he's wronged someone who was at peace with him or robbed an enemy without cause, then let this enemy pursue and overtake him. Let him trample David's life and lay his honor in the dust. He's basically saying, God, if I'm guilty, let them have me. But he's confident that he's innocent. He asks God to raise up in anger against his enemies to awaken and decree justice. He pictures a court scene. God is a judge with the assembled people around him, ruling over them from on high. David says that God judges the people and asks to be vindicated according to his righteousness and integrity. He wants the violence of the wicked to come to an end and for the righteous to be established. God examines hearts and minds. He's the righteous judge who sees everything. All right, well, that is the recap for today's reading. Before I jump into the questions, today's episode has been sponsored by Covenant Security Equipment. Covenant Security Equipment is a Christian company that partners with building contractors who build with safety in mind. Bullet-resistant windows, secure transaction systems, drive-through installations, and much more. Covenant Security Equipment delivers commercial-grade security solutions with fast turnarounds. To find out more, go to covenantsecurityequipment.com. Okay, let's jump into today's questions. Question number 1 is from Genesis 19 and 20. Lot's wife looked back at Sodom despite being warned not to. And here's the question. What parts of your old life or past sin do you keep looking back instead of moving forward? Question number 2 from what we read in Matthew. Jesus says that the wise builders build their house on the rock by hearing his words and putting them into practice. Here's the question. What words of Jesus are you hearing but not doing? Question number 3 is from what we read in Psalms. David declares his innocence and asks God to vindicate him. And here's the question. When we're falsely accused or misunderstood, do you trust God with justice or do you feel compelled to defend yourself? Good golly, I tend to feel compelled to defend myself. I need to trust in God's justice. And the fourth and final question, which is the same every day, what was our main takeaway from today's reading? Today my main takeaway was what we read in Genesis. Very, very grotesque and disgusting stories, but that is just evidence to me of how corrupt the world is without God. So thankful that Jesus paid the ultimate price. All right, well, that is the recap for today, and I will see you all again tomorrow.